We are pleased to welcome our next speaker, Ursula Bittner, who will speak about sustainability and greenwashing. She's an economic expert at Greenpeace, working on topics including democracy, compliance, civil society, trade, supply chains, agriculture, and biodiversity. Ms. Bittner advocates a liberal democracy, a strong civil society, sustainable agriculture, and the protection of our planet. In the past, she has made research trips to India, Brazil, Argentina, Taiwan, Japan, China, and Eastern Europe. In 2021, she founded the initiative Saubere Hände stoppt Korruption to fight against corruption in Austria. She strongly believes, in order to stop the climate and biodiversity crisis, we need to change our way of producing and consuming food, energy, and raw materials. To stop greenwashing in all sectors, we need compulsory legal frameworks applying to everyone.
Hello and welcome from my side as well. I'm happy to speak here at this conference about sustainability and compliance. Do we need regulations for a better world? First of all, I want to give you the information, or I might, you know that already, that we are in a biodiversity and a climate crisis. The climate crisis is well known, but the biodiversity often gets little attention. But now, however, 150 species of plants and animals are dying out every day. So 1 million of 8 million species are threatened. So we are in a very alarming situation, and I think I don't need to tell you about the climate crisis, how alarming this crisis is. And we're still losing every year 10 million of hectares of forest, which are crucial to stop the climate crisis. As you can see here, done by the World Biodiversity Council of the United Nations, that they're saying that the genetic diversity is threatened. So this is this red part on the left side above the slide. You can see here, this is a very alarming situation. They also said that in the last 50 years, the so-to-say ecosystem services, although I don't like this word very much because it's not a service the nature is providing us, but still like pollination, providing us with food, clean water, clean air, all those services nature providing us are getting worse and worse in the last 50 years. I might think you all heard about the country overshoot day. This is the day when everyone is using the same resources as, for example, Austria, where I'm coming from, or Germany. When would our resources end? And in Austria, it's beginning of April. In Germany, it's beginning of May. Meaning, this is a very unequal situation in our world. So it's very important that especially the rich countries are using less resources and emit less CO2 emissions. You can see here the difference of countries, how much they emit of CO2 emissions. India, for example, it's 3.5 tons per capita every year. And if you compare that to the US, for example, it's 23.5 tons a year. So you see here the very inequality of how much people emit CO2 emissions. We made in Austria, Greenpeace Austria made a study, and we found out that only in Austria, 10% of the richest households use 4 times more emissions than the 10% poorest households in Austria. And this is due to leisure, our mobility, how we fly or drive, how we travel. And I also checked my footprint. There are different providers you can use. And my footprint is even 14.2 CO2 emissions every year. Even though I'm vegan, I don't eat any meat or animal products, but I flew last year. And that's why I have this very high CO2 emission every year. So, but where do we need to go? You all know about the Paris Agreement. And if we want to reach the Paris Agreement, we would need to reduce our CO2 emissions to 2 tons per capita. This is a reduction of 90%. And just have in mind that in Germany it's 13.2, in Austria 12.8, and in the US even 23.5. This means especially luxury emissions, I call it, like flying, can be reduced. just have in mind that in the world only 80%, only 20% of the world's population ever flew in a plane. So why is that? Why do we have so much emissions and a big footprint? This is maybe something you already know. It's the way we use our resources. For example, agriculture and using of raw materials. Agriculture is responsible for 80% of deforestation. Then our mobility, how we drive, how we travel to other continents and countries. Overfishing, of course, pollution of our seas, how we use plastic, single use of plastic, and also sealing. Austria is a forerunner in that. Like in Austria, we lose every day the size of 20 football fields where we build parking spaces or supermarkets and so on. So with all those reasons, we're destroying continuously our nature. And people got aware of that. People getting sensitive, at least because there were some environmental NGOs, environmental organizations fighting for nature. And I found this graph. It's from 2017, but I think it's still kind of the same or even stronger, that in the younger generation, more than 80% are asking companies to be sustainable, asking companies to take responsibility. And even the older generation is very keen on that. In Germany, for example, it's 1/3 of all people saying that sustainability is important for the decision what to buy and what not. So then measures were implemented. So what measures were implemented? CSR, corporate social responsibility, from the 2000 and onwards on the level of the European Union were implemented. So companies started to make sustainability reports. But then there were a lot of other measurements implemented. I highlighted some of them. For example, agrofuels was implemented as climate-friendly way of fueling our cars, even though those cultivation of crops are destroying biodiversity. Genetical modification was implemented to save our climate-friendly crops, which failed, totally failed. Then the Consumer Good Forum is another good example. In 2010, the Consumer Good Forum, it's an association out of more than 400 companies from supermarkets, retail chains, traders, agriculture providers. They said they want to have deforestation-free supply chains by 2020. They failed. So in 2020, they just developed a new initiative, Forest Positive. Other measures were implemented from the 90s. A lot of multi-stakeholder initiatives were implemented. They created certifications and green labels. You can see here on the side, like FSC, MSC, ASC, you name it. Then companies started to have cooperations with non-governmental organizations, as you can see here, Conservation International or the WWF. And the image of this environmental organization should be kind of flip over to the companies. And then another thing was implemented called offsetting. So the idea is to just compensate your CO2 emissions. You just continue producing as you do, but you support some environmental or deforestation project in the global south, and then you compensate your CO2 emissions. And at the end, you can call yourself a climate neutral company or a climate neutral product. So one thing was in common for all those measures. They were all voluntary, and they're all based on this capitalistic system of endless growth. And it gives us the impression we just have to do green. As long as we do green, everything will be fine, and we can stop the climate change and the biodiversity crisis. And all of these measures outsourced the solution into the global south, from certification to fortress conservation areas, or offsetting. So the question was, did that help in the last years? Did these measures help to really save our planet? And actually, it did not. That's my first slide. We are still in a biodiversity crisis. We're in a climate crisis. We still have 150 species every day dying out. And then companies are starting to sell those measures. As you can see here also from airplanes, they do not change their core business, but they selling themselves as green and as sustainable. For example, Lufthansa, they said they have sustainable fueling, but they actually could do other measures as stopping domestic flights, investing in trains, selling train tickets, but no, they're saying they have a sustainable fuel. You can also see here H&M. H&M, for example, is still burning in an area in Denmark 12 tons a year of clothes. And at the same time, they're selling the conscious exclusive collection, saying as long as you buy sustainable, everything will be fine. Same with Amazon. I think I do not mention that Amazon is a huge CO2 emitter, at the same time having its climate pledge friendly initiative where they just sell products with certification and saying as long as you buy those green certificates, you're doing good. So what is this? This is greenwashing. Greenwashing, and here I can read out a definition of greenwashing. It's an umbrella term for a variety of misleading communication and practices that intentionally or not, and that's crucial, it doesn't have to be intentionally. Even though it's not intentionally, it's still greenwash. It induces false positive perception of an organization's environmental performance. And it can be conducted by any actor. That can be done by companies, it can be done by governments, it can be done by international organization, research organization, or even non-governmental organization. And it's misleading consumers regarding their environmental practice. There was one review by the UK Competition and Market Authority and the Netherlands authorities, and they reviewed 500 global websites. And in this website, they saw that 40% of all claims, all green claims, fall into the category of greenwash, which means these claims were vague information, misleading and deceptive environmental communication, misleads the words, misleads the visuals, sounds better than it is, or even communicate the law, or exaggerates how green the product is. Sometimes they also leave out some crucial information. So why is greenwashing so dangerous? As I mentioned before, it just gives us the feeling, as long as we do it green, everything will be fine. There are some basic backgrounds, I would say, why greenwashing is so dangerous. One, it kind of rewrites the narrative. That means we do not have to bother with legislation. We just buy ourselves out to the green consumption. We don't need to systematic change. We don't need to change the system. We just need to buy sustainable. It loses the face of consumers in green claims. So if consumers realize that companies do greenwash, they kind of come in a very laid-back, passive situation where they say everything is greenwash, so they don't believe anymore in any green products. It's furthermore shrinking the window of opportunity to achieve policy change if company continues to discredit proposals and actions to mitigate our problems. And it brings us also in a false sense of security. If we believe companies are doing good, some other actors are doing good, they have it all in control, then we think we don't need to really change something. And of course, businesses who really want to do green, who really want to change something, they also have some big disadvantages because consumer cannot distinguish between real sustainability and not real sustainability. So I give you now 3 examples of greenwashing and the measurements which were really wrong and did not good. First of all, certification and green labels, I mentioned that before, offsets and climate neutrality, and cooperation between companies and NGOs. So certification. You all know certification, I guess. It's green labels. There's a number that we have about 450 different green labels worldwide. I believe it's even more than that, but that's an official number. The problem with certification and green labels is that they actually improve the image of forest and ecosystem risk commodities. So hence they expand the commodity production, they're stimulating demand of products we actually need to reduce, as for example palm oil, soya, timber, or beef, for example. Most of the time, certifications are organized in associations where big industries are members, and industry are deciding what is the standard about, what are the the inspection guidelines about, and so on. So it's very much dominated by the industry. We also found out in our report a year ago, Destruction Certified, that most of the certification schemes lack of transparency and product traceability and have a very weak implementation. Even though they have strong standards, they do not implement them enough. And then a lot of certified companies still continue to be linked to forest and ecosystem destruction. Sometimes they split the companies and one part of the company gets certified and the others just continue to be linked to deforestation. And then there are some inherent weaknesses and limits in certification schemes, as for example, sanctions and penalties. So if a company is not complying with the certification scheme, the hardest thing a certification scheme can do is just to take away the label. It's not the same as, for example, taking away the trading license by the government. So the message here is certification can definitely not replace any laws. And you can also see that there was one law, or there is still one law going on the European Union level, the Forest and Ecosystem Risk Commodity Law, which should stop the imports of products causing deforestation, especially, as I said before, soya, palm oil, beef, and so on. Companies saying that they are for this law because it's good to have deforestation-free supply chains. At the same time, they are in the certification schemes. But we found out that those companies hiding behind some association, as for example, the Confederation of European Paper Industry or the Food, Drink and Europe, hiding behind those associations, and those associations then lobby against strong laws. And this is called deep greenwash, when companies saying they are for sustainability, they are for green labels and green products, but in the background, they're lobbying against strong laws. Another example is offsets and climate neutrality. I mentioned it before already. This is something coming up even more and more. We have climate neutral milk, we have climate neutral heating oil, we have climate neutral sweets here on the right side of the slide. We have climate neutral drinks. And what does it actually mean? It actually means that those companies compensate their CO2 emissions. There's one example of Austrian Airlines, an Austrian flying company. So if you want to compensate your current flight or your past flight, you can do that easily. Here I made a screenshot. If you want to compensate it right now with 0 years, you pay about, 770 euros per ton of CO2. If you take yourself about 10 years, you pay 20 euros per ton for compensate your flight. And the projects they're having, there's some interesting projects you're supporting with compensation. For example, there's a carpentry who established an e-charging station. And when you buy your certificates, you are supporting a company investing in e-charging station. So I would say it would be better if Austrian investing in trains or stop short flights than doing this compensation. It's also interesting, there was a survey by booking.com saying that 81% of travelers confirm that sustainable travel is important for them. But if you ask them what percentage of passengers really accepting this offsetting by the European airline, it was between 2019 and October 2020, was not even 5% used this opportunity. So even though they don't know about it or they don't believe in it. So what is the problem with offset and climate neutrality? It actually legitimized the business as usual, and business as usual is the climate crisis we are at the moment. It's based on exploitation of the natural carbon sinks of the global south, and it's a very old idea of paying for someone else to reduce or remove their carbon while you just carrying on business as usual and pumping CO2 emissions into the atmosphere. It's very sophisticated, it's cynical, and it's a very pervasive form of greenwashing. And furthermore, when it comes to climate neutral, there is no common international definition what it actually means. It does not say if you include your scope 1, 2, 3 CO2 emissions. Most of the companies also just use scope 1 and scope 2. But if you say you're climate neutral and you want to go towards this climate neutral pledge, it must be understandable and it must be published. And Greenpeace has a clear position on that. There is no way that offsetting is a solution. So the question is, why do we need to call ourselves climate neutral? Can we just say it's reduced, or we just don't use any label? The last example is confrontation or cooperation. In the 90s, a lot of environmental NGOs came up, and in general NGOs, they have very different tasks to do. They work in care, they work in international development, environment, human rights, and a lot of them are advocacy NGOs. And they were very confrontative in the 80s, 90s, and in the 2000s. And this kind of way of cooperation changed a lot in the last years. So from a very confronted way, it comes to more cooperation in the last years. And the question is if this is a good way forward. If we have a very balanced situation, then civil society, economy, and politics are kind of correcting and controlling each other. So civil society is controlling politics, is controlling economy, business. Politics should control economy and business. But if the relation between economy, the businesses, and the civil society gets too close and there is a financial dependency, the question is, can civil society still fulfill its role as a control and as a corrective? And there is one initiative I wanted to present to you. It's a private initiative. It's also voluntary. It's established in Austria, where they wanted to regulate the cooperation between NGOs and companies to maybe have a first step before there is a regulation for governments. Because so far there is nothing. There is no regulation. Yeah, so in the meantime, a lot of media and a lot of people, actors, getting aware of greenwashing. They're getting alarmed. Last week, it was in the media that Coca-Cola is sponsoring the COP in November. And that it was highlighted in the media as greenwashing. So people are very sensitive about that topic. The question now I wanted to answer is, do we need regulation for a better world? And I would say yes, the time for voluntarism is over. It's very important for companies to decide for what they use their financial resources. Do they use it to just claim they're sustainable? Do they use it to offset their CO2 emissions? Or maybe inset them and change their core business, make their core business more sustainable? There are some current legislation on the way on the European Union level. That's just the European Union, which I think are very first good steps, like the forest and ecosystem, risk commodity regulation, green claims, eco-design regulation. There's also the Sustainable Supply Chain Initiative. So there's much going on at the moment, and I would say it would for companies good to support also these regulations, to be very strong, to have a playing level field between different companies. So what are real solutions? Laws, of course. Then, of course, proper law enforcement. So we need much more investment in authorities that they can also control those laws. We need a mind shift in civil society. We cannot continue as we do at the moment. We need to produce and consume less. At least the energy crisis now is showing us that. And we need new business models also for companies. They should focus on repair and reuse and swap. And the change of core business is very important. So as I mentioned throughout my presentation, it's not about making things sustainable which are not sustainable. Thank you.